Okay, week 8, patrol traffic. This week we've got the paper assignment due, but this is one of the most important parts of the entire course. We're going to talk about this in 7 key points. First key point is patrol. Departments call it the backbone of the police department. It's kind of an interesting deal because the face of patrol, or patrol I should say, is the face of the police department. A vast majority of contacts are with patrol officers. The second most is with traffic. We'll talk about these people next. However, that's kind of a different subset, but it looks the same. People very seldom talk to detectives. They very seldom talk to police managers, and they may go to a function and hear the chief of police talk about crime or some important issue within the community. But generally, people don't talk to the chief either. Patrol. And unfortunately, not a lot of agencies really take care of patrol. If you go to detectives, in some agencies it's a promotion. In other agencies it's a duty that you get assigned to for a period of time and then rotate back. The idea is to get as many people trained up in detective type work. However, what happens is somebody gets into detectives and is either in really good stead with the person that's running the detective bureau or some other manager, and they will continue to be extended and extended. Really hard on morale for patrol. Detectives have a lot of leeway in what they do. Patrol officers don't. They get told where to go and what to do almost 70% of the time, perhaps. And that's in the handling of calls for service. Dispatch will tell them where to go and what to do. And then detectives themselves, they won't, or once you're in detectives, you go to detectives or you are sent back to patrol. And just the way those are worded makes it sound like patrol is a demotion. And most people, when they first get into law enforcement, they'll think, oh, okay, well, being patrol is fun. And you do a lot of stuff, you're pretty autonomous. You have to handle calls for service and such, but it's not bad. The problem is that the longer that you're in patrol doing the same thing day in, day out, the more difficult it can be. The best job in the whole department actually is patrol supervisor, because then you can go to whatever call you want, and you get to go to the good calls, deal with complaints and that, but it's a really good job. Point number 2 is the idea of some managerial things that you should know. If you are going into law enforcement, I would put this someplace that you can refer back to. It comes from O.W. Wilson, and we talked about him earlier when we talked about being at Berkeley Police Department and under August Vollmer, and then later Fullerton PD, and then Kansas City. It might have been Kansas City. It was a big, a large Midwest city, and then went to a big city, which was Chicago. But in his book, Police Management, he talked about 3 different necessities. The first is span of control. That means that you have responsibility for a set number of people. The second is unambiguous hierarchy. So you know who you work for. And then the third is centralization of command, meaning that decisions are made at the command level, chief, deputy chief, captains, commanders, whatever they call them, and then those flow downward. The concept is that the downward communication gets the intent of the chief down to the troops accurately. Now, the reality is that agencies are going to have higher than normal or higher than Wilson wanted spans of control. And it's just a personnel game. You know, it's a numbers game. If you have 30 people that work swing shift over the course of 7 days, well, if you have a 1-to-5 ratio of officers to supervisors, or supervisors to officers, then you would expect 6 sergeants. The problem is that you may have to run that with 4, or even less. Once you start doing that, though, that is a recipe for disaster. Your 2 most important people to prevent misconduct in the police department are the field training officer and the field sergeant. And the reason is because they put forth what the culture of the department is. And they're the ones that are in the best position to combat informal leaders that are negative. We'll talk a little bit about leadership later in the course. Third point, types of patrol. I'm sure we can probably figure out some hybrids, but random, everybody goes out in the car or go to their units, they go 10-8, they get out in the field, and they go to their beat, and they drive around randomly. Well, random is seldom random. If you're working day shift and you go in the field at 7 in the morning, during wintertime, you're probably going to go to your schools. And you're going to have a presence at the schools. People are coming and going. You're going to go look for people that are, parked in cars watching kids. Those are the kind of things that you may be, if you're in a beat that has businesses, you may be thinking more about traffic, looking to assist people, and then be prepared to go take the reports that come up overnight. Where somebody's had their business broken into, their car broken into, and now they need an insurance report, or maybe they have some good leads, although that doesn't happen that much. But it's not random. Directed, that's where a problem's identified and officers are put into an area to deal with a problem. Aggressive patrol, kind of that zero tolerance thing where officers go into an area and they do whatever enforcement action they can find, whether it's making an arrest or writing a ticket for littering or jaywalking or urinating in public, or what people might consider a minor offense. But it is interesting when you take care of the little problems, the big problems go elsewhere. They don't go away, but when we talk about crime analysis, the idea of displacement, making a problem go somewhere else, is really a solution, especially if you can make that problem go to an adjacent city. And then the last one is saturation patrol, where you put a bunch of people in a particular area. They may be directed towards a certain crime issue they have, or that could be some other reason that you have people there. You see that a lot with traffic enforcement, where they'll do a day where they go to a particular area and just write as many tickets as they can for a particular violation or any violation. 4, this one's really important. We talked about the things that caused change in the eras of policing. That abject political corruption, the lack of professionalism with officers caused reformers to push to the professional model. And one of the things that came out of the professional model was the idea of random patrol. Point number 4 is the Kansas City Preventative Patrol Experiment. Well known, has been replicated in a couple of other locations. And what they did was they took and divided the city into areas. And one area functioned as normal, control area. Officers were put in there, and let's say that totally made up numbers, you had 5 officers in that particular area, and they answered calls for service in that area. They did enforcement action in that area. Then you had a saturation patrol where you put in a ton of officers. Maybe you put in 10 as opposed to 5 in that particular area, and then to see what happened. The next thing that you had is an area where you had a directed patrol type operation. In the one area, we didn't have anybody. If a call for service came up, you took somebody from a different area, and then they went in and handled the problem. And what the preventative patrol experiment found was, as far as crime goes, there was no difference in either approach, in any of those approaches. Kind of interesting when you look at zero tolerance and some of the stuff that came about in the 80s with like the Miracle in Boston is something that would be good for you to take a look at as a student of criminal justice. The subway crime issues in New York with Bill Bratton, Commissioner Bratton's first tour through New York, and what happened to crime there when some of these other techniques were taken or undertaken. Now, what also happens here is a discussion of response times. If you had a beat with nobody in it and you had to call somebody from somewhere else, their response time was going to go up, meaning it would take them longer to get there. The city councils love low response times, and to be able to say that priority E emergency calls are handled, officers arrive within 6 minutes. I mean, think about it, if you're in the middle of an emergency, 6 minutes is a long time. But some agencies, it's 15, 20, half hour before the police can get there. And the thought is that the sooner you get there, the more likely you're going to be to arrest somebody. And that just isn't the case. If the officer isn't there within the first 2 or 3 minutes of a call, unless it's a certain call, like a domestic or a shoplifter in custody or something of that nature, the bad guy's going to be gone, and it's going to be a reactive investigation that will solve that particular issue. But people like it because they feel better once the cops get there and make the place safe. That's a really important concept for for citizens, is that feeling of having order restored. But when it comes to a response time, these are all the things that are in a response time. The incident occurs. The next thing that happens is it's discovered. Somebody calls the police. Dispatcher takes the call. Dispatcher puts it into CAD, computer-aided dispatch, into the computer system. It goes to another dispatcher who's handling the radios. That last dispatcher then will decide who of the officers available will get that call for service. Now, CAD will make a recommendation, but the dispatcher will use their own intuition and experience to override that decision of the computer if they have good reason. Now the officer has to drive there and get there. So there's quite a bit of stuff that happens from when the crime occurs until officers get there. Response time is broken down in from the time people report the crime until arrival. And that's can be a pretty long time. Often people will make a few phone calls, and I'm going to check that. The time of discovery until the time the officers get there is your response time. Time of discovery till when they get there. But people will, call their parents or call a friend or call somebody they know whose brother was a cop. And then they end up calling the police. So it's a little bit different. Point number 5, almost there, and that's shifts in patrol. Most agencies work under an alternative work schedule. Classically, it was an 8 to 5, it was an 8-hour day, 3 shifts, 1 or 2 or 3 cars, depending upon the size of the agency, may overlap, come in a little bit early, and get off a little bit early so that there's coverage in shift change. But things would happen all the time during shift change, and nobody would be available. They'd all be either in the station or in the back parking lot, or still in briefing. And it could be a long time to get an officer someplace. The alternative work schedule is kind of a union-based deal. Managers generally don't like that idea. Their idea is they want to have people coming through the door as often as they can, as many times as they can during the course of a week. The 5/8 traditional shift is most effective for that. The next one you see in many, if not most, if not almost all agencies, have some semblance of a 4-10, 4-day-a-week, 10-hour-a-day shift schedule. Very popular with officers. And then some even go to a 3-day, 12.5-hour or 13-hour day. So that varies in between stuff. Okay, so you got these officers here and their shifts. Where are you going to put them? Well, generally what happens is an agency will divide the city up geographically, based on common borders. If you look at the slide deck, there's an aerial view of a beach city. It happens to be Oceanside. But you can see where there are some natural barriers. There's a freeway, a major highway that runs from west to east. You've got areas of industrial complex. You have areas of residential, build-up. You have beach areas. And my guess is that that's how Oceanside was configured. It was based on these geographical indicators. Now, the more difficult way to do that is to do a workload study. And that's where you take and you look at the calls for service, the types of calls, the resources that are available in the particular areas, and then you deploy your people based on that. Really intensive for staff to figure out, not necessarily popular with officers because they may not have a shift they work for. They may come in, you can just intuitively think about it. 6 in the morning, people get up, they start to get themselves ready to go to work, and they find crime. They find their car's been broken into, property's been vandalized, they get to their businesses have been vandalized, so you're going to have higher calls for service. And then from 10, till noon at least, you're not going to have that much going on. Be fairly slow. Starting around 11:30, you start to get traffic issues. People are going to lunch. They're in a hurry. Car crashes. Maybe you have confrontations with people. And then that'll run till 1:30, 1:30 to 4. Can be fairly slow. And it may be call to call, but it's not a call and then 5 or 6 or 8 calls holding. Then you have nighttime, dinner time, and you got all kinds of things going on at dinner time. So you can see where you may have to piecemeal together your deployment. Um, when I was working, we looked at that. We did a study. We came up with a really weird work schedule, and the union just wouldn't go for it. Called a change in working conditions. Point 6, individual measures of productivity. We talked about it before. How do you know if the police are being, or if an officer is being effective, an individual? You know, classically, it's that tickets, citations, arrests, field interview cards, field contacts, and then otherwise reports taken, traffic collisions investigated, citations issued. All of those easily identifiable and objective measures. When you throw in community policing, now you're in a whole different world, because what are you going to call? You're wanting officers to be in the field and be contacting business owners and developing partnerships and relationships. And if you're not set up like a New York with apartment buildings and that, there may not be the chance for officers to really contact the public. I mean, if you live in a suburban area in a single family house, when's the last time you saw a police officer walking down the street without a business purpose in mind, just walking down the street to meet people? And my guess is, if you really think about it, probably never. Just because it doesn't work geographically. But what's it going to show as far as his productivity? See, that's one of the real big management downfalls to community policing. Talk about that later. Number 7, traffic. Traffic functions, this would be your traffic division. Uniform generally, motors, most often, really cool boots, motorcycles, and they, their job is to issue citations. Their job isn't to give warnings or tell people how to drive better. Their job is to find violators and write them citations. In the enforcement, you have moving, the motors, you have parking, often civilians, especially if you've got like a downtown region or a beach area. And here's the secret on enforcement: it's revenue. Part of that money, a good part of the money when the citation's written, good part of that money goes back to the police department or to the city to be used in the general fund. So a traffic division may be very important to balancing the budget in a city. The next part of the enforcement section is going to be investigation. And there you have usually a sworn officer or 2 or 3, depending upon the workload, who investigates major accidents, fatalities, and does follow-up investigation on hit and runs. And depending upon how it works out in a particular agency, they may write follow-up citations. 2 people crashed, one's found to be most at fault, violated a particular section of the vehicle code, red light, and then they may get a citation in the mail. Depends on the agency. Because fairly simple to do, doesn't take that much time, and it's revenue. The last one in the enforcement are DUIs, drunk driving enforcement. Very common to have a small number, 1, 2, 3, 4 people dedicated to it. Sometimes agencies will only do it during certain hours or certain seasons. Summertime, may have you may have a lot of problems with DUI accidents and going in those kind of issues. The next of the 3 E's is education, and education. You see that in DUI checkpoints. DUI checkpoints have a really low hit rate, but the idea is to let people who might be driving after cocktails to let them know that there's a potential issue out there for them, being the police might stop them. They might run into a DUI checkpoint, but understand the hit rate's really low, unless you happen to find a gold mine. There's every agency will have one. It may take them a while to find it, but they'll do 2, 3, 4, 5 DUI arrests for this really expensive operation. And then they'll go to another location and they'll do 25. And they go, oh, it can't be. They'll come back at 30. It's really interesting how there are just areas where that all happens. Traffic school is one of those. I started teaching traffic school a long time ago, and the idea was to educate people. And then you've got other things that you see. Every 15 minutes is another program that you have. And then when it comes to engineering, it's the idea of looking at what's going on in the street, the road standards. Is the road built properly? Where I live now is a nightmare when it comes to engineering. Many of our roads, the residential roads or the farm roads, are the width of one lane of traffic that you would see here in Long Beach. Big potential problem. Great potential for accidents. Okay, so those are the 7 main learning points I want you to get out of this week. I hope you have some time and you don't get too stuck on other assignments that are coming up due, and also look at the supplemental stuff that I've posted. It's all things that I think are really important to the overall discussion.